Welcome to the 775 Alive podcast, your rural Nevada headquarters for decoding politics, economics, and general global shenanigans. I'm Crystal Newton, your business strategist, breaking down why Nevada's hustle is stronger than a sagebrush root in a windstorm. Here with my trusty co-host, Scott Gaborski, PhD historian, here to explain the smart lessons of history, even if we are likely to ignore them. Grab your boots for a wild ride through today's most important news.
Okay, welcome back here to 775 Alive. We're continuing to delve into some interesting issues today, and we're going to be joined by Dave Marlon. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Scott. It's an honor to be here.
So, Dave, him and I have met a couple times, and he's been working closely with Crystal. He's actually a candidate for Las Vegas City Council Seat 6. But why we had him on today was something that happened, actually another part of his job, where he runs a drug addiction center called Vegas Stronger and has been working with the homeless communities. And part of the reason we found this interesting was back, when was that, Crystal? Last December, we were on Talk with the Conservative, the Brinkley's radio show. And we're having a conversation, and one of the things we brought up, talking about, life in the rurals, was rural homelessness. And we got actually a lot of pushback, not pushback, but feedback from people who were like, we didn't really think rural communities had a homeless population problem, but we do. So this is one of those things that's very interesting. And of course, over the last 4 or 5 years, been a lot of attention paid to the drug addiction problems out here in rural America, right? We had J.D. Vance's book. We've had a Hillbilly Elegy. We've had a whole range of other stuff dealing with that issue. So interestingly, this homeless and drug addiction issue, although we tend to think about it separately, actually sort of bridges this gap across the 775. So with that, Dave, you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into dealing with the drug addiction problem and where this intersects with homelessness in your view?
Well, thanks so much. I'll give you the longer story. I worked my way up to becoming CEO at a company called Sierra Health Services for my first 19 years in Las Vegas, running Health Plan of Nevada, Sierra Health and Life Insurance Company. So I became an expert in healthcare in Las Vegas, in Reno, and in the rurals. I in 2005 got clean and sober, and I have not had a drink or a drug in over 21 years now.
Yay!
And when I got sober, I decided to retire from the insurance company, and I opened up a drug treatment center. It grew to be the largest drug treatment center in the state with 400 beds, treated thousands of people. And that's when I augmented my MBA with a master's in counseling, a license to treat patients, and then a doctorate in psychology. I sold that in 2016 to a New York Stock Exchange publicly traded company called American Addiction Centers. I watched them essentially ruin it. However, I then founded in 2017 Vegas Stronger, which is an integrated behavioral healthcare company offering services to our most underserved. We now have Reno Stronger. In Pahrump, we have Nevada Stronger. And in Las Vegas, we actually have 6 clinics and treat thousands of our unhoused. And our recognition is that, for example, in 2025, we had over 2,000 unhoused come into our clinic, and 94% of them, once they met with clinicians, were diagnosed with a serious substance use disorder. So the Venn diagram of homelessness and substance use has a tremendous amount of crossover. In Las Vegas, it was 94% last year. We continue to grow, and we have psychiatry, counseling, as well as a aggressive outreach department, which tries to bring humans in off the streets to help them address serious mental illnesses and address substance use disorders. Our clinic in Pahrump does about 4 a week. And I have 2 outreach people who regularly go out into the encampments, some of the trailers they'll have that are kind of unsupported by, clean lavatories or power. So there's kind of in the rurals, there's a fine line between housed and unhoused, and the way some people will camp. We address the root causes of mental illnesses and substance use disorders. And, it's my belief that no one in our first world city and our first world state, nobody should be camping in certainly in Las Vegas, here in the Mojave Desert. I'll remind you that just 2 years ago, we had a hot summer. We had over 400 people die from heat related injuries out in the streets. So people should not be camping in our city. And it's our objective to have 7 days a week integrated behavioral health care access for them to come in and get care and address the root causes of these problems.
I just toured the facility with Patricia and Garland, and I couldn't have been more impressed. And I don't want to bring the episode down. I just want to mention that my sister died of a drug overdose, and I know firsthand how difficult it is to convince somebody on an addiction to get help. And something that I was really impressed with, you've got a lot of great things at the facility, like people can learn how to grow in a garden, and there's a workout facility, and you have every possible professional there to help them, whether it's getting Medicare or it's getting a job after they're done with treatment. But also, you send shuttles out into the community every day to make sure that you're interacting with them every day, because they say no, they say no, they say no. But one day they might say yes. And I thought that was really heartwarming. But a serious question I wanted to ask you: when we're dealing in politics, I really want to get to the heart of what's going on with the homelessness and addiction. I'm particularly thinking of California, where you have this massive homelessness population. My question to you is, what do you think's going on in our culture and society? And is it different in California than Nevada?
It is a little different in California. And to me, I think this crisis falls on all of our shoulders. Las Vegas is $1 billion brand. And the Las Vegas that existed 15 or 20 years ago is different in everybody's mind as the Las Vegas today. People who come visit Las Vegas today know that panhandling, vagrancy, people begging, unhoused, laying on the strip is it's just a matter of course, and it should not be. There's 8,000 in the last Clark County homeless count. And that is not an insurmountable amount of people to be able to get help for. Now, in California, where they have over 100,000, that is a way different animal. In Las Vegas and in the rurals, you're often going to find that near a homeless camp, there is a supply of money and there is a supply of food and goods. And too often, it's a church who is feeding them on a regular basis, or there's minivans dropping off food and blankets and supplies to enable that unhealthy homeless behavior. So to me, when I say it falls on all of our shoulders, what we need to do is we need to get educated that most of the unhoused have a substance use disorder, and anything you're doing to enable a person using a substance is not helping them. It's hurting them, and it's allowing them to stay in their addiction. So I believe the only thing that should be done to somebody who is begging on a street corner is we should offer them transportation to a clinic, to the social safety net to get connected. We need to, all of us, we need to stop giving them money. We need to stop giving them food. We need to direct them to the social safety net because, not only is it hurting our brand, our families are affected because we don't feel safe in the streets. We don't feel safe going to our parks. There's people camping. And I assure you, the people who are unhoused, particularly now and through the summer, they are not having a good time. They're not free people, even though they might tell you they want to be left alone. They're suffering and they deserve our help. Now, our help isn't free food, free housing, free stuff for life. Our help is helping them address their mental illnesses and helping address their substance use disorders so they can become self-supporting.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to come back to this issue of addiction versus other types of mental health issues, because I think there's a factor in that. But just to follow up on the camp thing, it's interesting as you laid out this dynamic, because one of the things we were talking about, Crystal mentioned her neck of the woods doesn't really have a large homeless population. Elko, a number of years ago, about 6 or 8, the city actually purchased a campground called the Humanitarian Camp. So they run the camp for a homeless population, and we have a fish subsidiary to Friends and Service Helping that's providing a lot of the food and trying to connect them here to social services. But I think one of the problems we've had, the idea behind the camp and the social service was to sort of keep the homeless population out of downtown Elko.
Yeah, contained.
Contained. But one of the things that's really unique up here is because of our weather conditions is we actually have a seasonal problem. So in the winter, because it's so cold, we see a number of these people, not all. I mean, there's a number of year-round residents of these camps. But in the summer, that camp swells, right? We have people coming in around I-80 or the other corridors and then drifting back out. And it's got into a sort of a weird situation where it's a lot of, it's very contentious. We still have a lot of the older Elko community members that are like, we're just wasting money on this camp. What we should be doing is just, let's buy them a bus ticket to Reno or Salt Lake and get them out of town. So, on this stuff, is that a similar dynamic to what you're seeing in Pahrump and maybe some of these other rural areas, that it's a seasonal homeless problem, or is it year round, or?
Well, first of all, greyhound therapy, as it's called in our clinical business, it's a real thing. And there's been some improvements since the Sacramento Bee article of about 10 years ago, which really called out Las Vegas for engaging in greyhound therapy. And here in Las Vegas, we still offer bus tickets to people, but they need to call, give us a number. We need to talk to someone, a family member, a loved one who's willing to receive them. And we need to know that they're going to get to some place, some kind of support system. So if somebody gets stuck in Pahrump or gets stuck in Winnemucca or Elko, and if there's a place that they just need to get back to, facilitating that transport, if there is a place, to me, that's a reasonable humanitarian thing to do. Now, if you have somebody who is, couch surfing in Oregon and they want to come and couch surf in Las Vegas and we're facilitating transport, then we're really just enabling this unhealthy behavior. So there is a time and a place for this greyhound therapy, but it needs to be done mindfully and responsibly. Now, in terms of a migratory pattern, we do see some, and it's one of my biggest fears. Las Vegas is a cash economy more so than California. Some of the corners where panhandlers will work are pretty lucrative, and if word gets out that, hey, listen, if it's tough here in Los Angeles, but if you hitchhike to Las Vegas, you can make $50 an hour working a corner. We could have a terrible problem in Las Vegas if we encourage, that migration. I have read studies that the Seattle unhoused population are 50% from other areas, that they went to Seattle because it's conducive to be homeless. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's an additional reason not to be overly homeless friendly, because what that really is doing is it's supporting drug use, and supporting unhealthy behaviors. And instead, we need to help people return to self-sufficiency as opposed to, disconnecting from society.
Sorry, I didn't mean to smirk. I was kind of chuckling a little bit because the reason the homeless people came to Seattle was the reason I left Seattle.
Well, but this gets to an interesting, I think, dynamic. And again, Crystal and I were discussing this a bit yesterday. Just on the dynamic, because I tend to be one that believes there's different classes of homelessness or different groups of unhoused, right? I think what we see in Elko somewhat is the actual, for lack of a better term, a choiced unhoused, people who have just, for whatever reason, like that lifestyle. They're the ones that come up in the summer when it's comfortable and then drift off somewhere else in the winter and have the wherewithal. And they're actually the group that's going to be engaging in what you almost describe as these mercenary activities, finding the towns that offer the high amount of money working particular street corners. Then there's the population that seems to be the argument that really grabs politicians, the people that are unhoused because of temporary economic situations, right? Lost their job, bad luck, sometimes in terms of veterans who have trouble adjusting back. And that's a group where we don't really see the recidivism. Once they get connected with that social services, it seems, because they don't want that lifestyle, they fairly rapidly move out of the system. So in some ways, they're not the problem. But then there's this big group in the middle that either has drug addiction issues or, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this, have drug addiction issues because they're masking underlying mental health issues that haven't been addressed. So even if you address the drug issues, you're still left with a public health issue.
That's certainly true. And although I talked about 94% of the 2,000 unhoused we brought in had substance use disorders or were diagnosed thereof, more than half of them had a co-occurring mental illness. And understanding that if you're going through a normal life, and then starting in your early 20s, you start getting voices that are your head, to the point it's making it impossible to work. You develop schizophrenia, disconnecting from society. It's a reasonable choice. And I understand how people with serious mental illnesses can make that choice. But the answer isn't let's give them a tuna sandwich every day and a place to camp. The answer is to get them into treatment. There's particularly some of the long-acting injectables are particularly effective at helping addressing the symptomology of schizophrenia. So let's get them the medication they need. Let's get them the social services they need to be able to become self-supporting to the best of their ability. If we need to integrate them with the Social Security system or the Medicare system to be able to piece together a life with some dignity, as opposed to making a camp for them. I believe that we're a wealthy country, and we should have access to integrated behavioral health care as a pathway out of homelessness, as opposed to sort of giving up and condoning homelessness. Because what I find is that, again, in Las Vegas, we have an inadequate mental health system. So we have some people who are gravely affected, and they are mentally impaired to the point they're not even group appropriate here. But once we allow some of them to sleep outside and begin a little camp, other people with substance use disorders who don't want societal pressure to stop will kind of glom onto them, and they'll form the camps around them, recognizing that they could finally use with impunity the way they want to, around this other mentally ill person who obviously has to be here. So to me, this is a societal problem that most of it is a behavioral health solution. Now, I also want to point out, because you mentioned something that most of the opposition will say, and that is that this is an affordable housing issue. And I will tell you that in Las Vegas, affordable housing is an issue. I get it. As we're, as individual apartments have gone from $700 to $900 to $1,200, or some people are feeling pressure, but the 8,000 who are unhoused, most of which who I have got to meet myself. I've been working down here. This is all I do, 5 days a week for the last 8 years. The 8,000 who are homeless were not pushed out from a $900 to $1,000 rent. It's a different issue. It's almost all a behavioral health care problem versus an affordable housing issue. We do have affordable housing issues. We need to address that, but it's not what's causing people to camp outside.
Can I just follow up? Because one other thing that we've heard for years, and I spent most of my life in Atlanta, which, like most big cities, does have an unhoused problem that's waxed and waned over the years. But one thing a lot of people point to is, given the prevalence of mental health issues within this particular community, that basically that long process we saw in the early 80s, where a lot of these institutional laws, because of Supreme Court decisions back in the 70s, that you couldn't forcibly incarcerate someone who was nonviolent, and then the collapse of a whole range of mental health support structures. Do you think that's contributing, that what we're seeing is sort of the final catch up of some really bad policy decisions concerning mental health that were made in the early 80s? And now a generation later, we're actually seeing the dynamics of that.
I 100% agree with that, and really exacerbated by the addiction crisis, which took this from a onesie twosie problem to it made it thousands of people, have kind of glommed on to this homeless lifestyle. So you're right. Nothing breaks my heart more than my staff recognizing somebody who's gravely mentally ill on the streets. We move mountains and get them into a residential treatment program or a group home where they could finally be safe, only to find out that they elope a week or 2 weeks later. And, after we spend months getting them placed and calling the governor's office, they're doing whatever we have to do to be able to, get them paid supportive place to live. And they elope, and we see them back down on the streets, dirty and suffering, and back at it. So it's a very difficult problem. Once we decided that they have their own agency, that, even if a mental health person diagnoses them as not able to care for themselves, the American judicial system has decided that we all have agency, and that if they decide to elope from one of these facilities, they have that free will. That is perhaps one of the challenges that comes with our, ultimately free society that we all love.
Mm-hmm. And Crystal brought up something yesterday, and I just like for her to talk about it because you've already alluded it to this, where we have a situation with people. Well, not so much the broken windows. I was actually more fascinated with this idea that one of the problems with homelessness, and as Dave brought up, you'll get a homeless group that might have mental issues, and then the people who have addiction issues sort of glom them around them. And what Crystal pointed out is the centrality of those drug supply networks to keeping people in that situation, right? That homelessness, drug addiction, homelessness requires knowing the networks to get the drugs.
Yeah, Scott and I were trying to decide whether the seasonal homeless problem in Elko was fueled by Las Vegas, and I was like, I don't know, because that requires changing your supplier, and there's a whole thing that you have to get out of your comfort zone. I wasn't sure how much that had to do with anything. Um, but I was super curious I was converting the broken windows theory to homelessness, because it seemed to me that if you have a big encampment of people who've already figured out the supply chain and how to get all the resources, and it just makes it easier to join the homeless population. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's another challenge we have is that in these homeless camps, there's some camaraderie. There's obviously they trade information and share drugs or access to drugs. They look out for each other. Hey, I'm going panhandling for 2 hours. Can you watch my tent? There is absolutely a sense of community that exists in these camps. Now, the off ramp, if you want to go to Catholic Charities, you don't get met like you're met at a homeless camp with somebody who says, "Hey, welcome. Are you joining us? Do you need drugs? What's your deal?" You're met with, "Go get in this line over here." And often the off ramp for homelessness is more difficult and challenging than the off ramp to society to go to these camps. So what we need to do, and what I try hard to do at Vegas Stronger, is have a place that's just as welcoming. As you saw, Crystal, our building's all graffitied. We want people to recognize that when you're tired of the heat, when you're tired of not taking a shower, when you're tired of being outside and not knowing where your next meal is going to come from, you could walk through the golden door and you'll be met with smiling people who, well, hey, do you need a cigarette? How can we help you? The vibe is not a typical nonprofit, get into a queue. Perhaps my biggest lesson I've learned is I've had people want to serve food here. My clients are experts at standing in line. If I tell them there's going to be food, they all jump in a nice orderly line. We train our unhoused how to access free stuff, and they're quite adept at it. And to me, that's indicative of this challenge. We need a pathway out of it to self-sufficiency, not more handouts.
Well, let's talk about that off ramp a bit, particularly in terms of housing, because that seems to be one of the issues. So California and other places have dumped tons of money into tiny homes, tiny villages. In Europe, there's been experimentation with these rough weather pods in places like Germany, where people could seek temporary shelter. Up here in Elko, we actually had a firm, and this has turned into a big political football. They wanted to buy an abandoned hotel in downtown Elko and convert it to a temporary halfway house for the unhoused. And then they, for whatever reason, it didn't maintain the property. It didn't even get it set up, didn't get the financing. And then the homeless moved in and all of a sudden created a bigger problem downtown because the group that was coming in to offer the help with the homeless didn't follow through. So we had the city, ironically, clearing out a building that was designated for a homeless shelter of the homeless because nobody was monitoring it, right? Yeah, I mean, it was an insane series of circumstances, right? So given that just housing alone doesn't seem to be the solution to this problem. And again, I think a lot of that goes back to this belief that, oh, the homeless, they're there because capitalism's bad and they're losing jobs and there's no affordable housing. But I think what we're seeing, particularly with some of these recidivism rates of people who go through these halfway house programs, is it's not just providing housing, right? It's a whole range of other stuff that somebody has to pick up the slack on. What's your take on that?
I think defining it as a housing problem is a misnomer. I think if you have a person with severe schizophrenia, or you have a person who has a severe fentanyl use disorder, thinking that you're going to put them in a house is going to solve anything, is a mistake. And too often, well-meaning politicians try to address a homeless problem by giving houses, seeming obvious. But to me, it's a behavioral health issue. We need to help stabilize these mental health conditions. We need to be able to get people abstinent from particularly methamphetamine and opioids, which are the two, number one and two abused drugs by the unhoused. And that's the answer. We prefer a congregate housing, then a sober or transitional living, then moving to independent living. We have a Reno facility has a contract with the CARES complex in Reno. And there's a really cool story where they moved a homeless guy into the shelter, and he learned to do that for a period of time. And then they moved him into one of those tiny homes they have, and they do daily checks. And they walked into the home, and they found the guy had made a little fire on the living room table, and he was heating up a pot of water to make his morning coffee. And they said, "Hey, Joey, we have a coffee maker on the counter. You could let me show you how to do that." So recognizing that the skills that they've learned on the streets, they have to be unlearned, just like they need to get new neural pathways to address their substance use disorders. We have to teach them life skills. So it's really a gradual process, which is not a 30-day voyage. Our average client stays with us for 6 months. Many of them stay for more than a year, because to be able to unlearn the skills you've learned to manage a fentanyl habit for 10 years being unhoused and to matriculate you back into society takes time. But I do not believe it's a housing problem. I believe it's a behavioral health problem.
Yeah, I think at the heart of this, maybe it didn't start as a political problem, but it's certainly been supercharged and exacerbated by politics, in that you have on the Democratic side, they legitimately want to honor their choice to be homeless and live that lifestyle. And they've created this entire industrial apparatus around supporting that choice of, here, we'll give you food, we'll give you medication, we'll give you whatever you need, shelter. And it makes it easy to make that choice. And like the Republican conservative stance is, you have to do the hard thing and actually help these people. Because you have to look past that excuse with an addict. Like, a lot of addicts will tell you they love their life and they're convinced of that. But if you're sober looking at them, you're like, you've got issues, and they really can't see it for themselves. So I get frustrated on a political level because you have this entire side dumping billions of dollars into saying, let's support you in your choice. And it just further validates that. And it's so frustrating. I think anyone who's had a family member that's been drug addicted is probably frustrated with Democrats in this policy, because it's like, I knew this person growing up. This is not this person. We need to get them out of this headspace. That's not the right person making choices. Sorry, I get on my soapbox, but I really do think this is largely a political problem.
It's even deeper and much worse, because any of the homeless advocates, we hear them chanting, housing is a human right. Food is a human right. Healthcare is a human right. Those are all, bellwethers of socialism. Nobody and no place in the Constitution that tells me that I get free housing and free food and free healthcare. I have the right to, pursue life, liberty, and that's what I get. And as soon as we decide that they, as an American, they deserve a home, what that does is it takes the 90% of the hardworking Americans who've worked very hard to get a home, and it really diminishes that as we see in California, they start giving them out. And one of the problems where this becomes insidious is that there's, maybe 5% of the population struggling with, or a small percent of the population is struggling. And now if we start giving them houses, the next 10% of the population who's working low paying jobs and they're struggling hard to keep it going, they start looking at that and saying, wait a minute, here I am busting my hump to try to, put some meals on the table for my family and pay for this crappy apartment. And my brother or my friend who he was, smoking fentanyl, he gets a house. So it really disincentivizes American values.
Yeah. And I always say, like, Democrats they love to bring up the constitutional right to pursuit of happiness. And I like to remind them, you're able to pursue your happiness so long as you don't infringe on other people's happiness. And that's where you're going wrong.
Well, and it gets in not just on the housing side, but getting back to the drug addiction side, because I think one of the arguments that's gone on has also been this sort of issue that if um, uh, that people might choose to be drugs, but it's actually a waste of public money and public effort to try to stem the drug trade, right? Which is something we've seen over the last 18 months, right? We've seen the border closed. We do seem to see fairly solid decline in deaths from opioid and whatnot. Are you seeing an impact of that idea? I mean, again, this goes back to the 80s, the war on drugs and all this. Do you see an impact on if you could stop the drugs coming in, that's going to help tamp down some of this problem we have with the unhoused?
It is a horrific game of whack-a-mole. I worked very hard now 20 something years ago. I was on the governor's anti-meth task force, and were instrumental of having Sudafed moved behind the counter. It used to be an over-the-counter drug, and I knew lots of now clients who their job was to buy Sudafed up to the max and buy matches to be able to help manufacture methamphetamine. And I watched us in Las Vegas. We stopped almost all the labs, and there was a low in methamphetamine use because addressing the supply is a fantastic way to help address this problem. But I say it's whack-a-mole because then very quickly we saw super labs in Mexico form and start distributing methamphetamine back in. So I'm a 100% staunch supporter of secure borders to be able to prevent the flow, not just of fentanyl, which, although overdoses of fentanyl are going down, you will see in the news shortly, methamphetamine overdoses are about to pass them, and methamphetamine use is also on the uptick, and just as pervasive as a problem as opioids. So it's a close partnership with secure borders, effective enforcement, as well as having treatment available. So when someone is ready to tap out and get help, that we're able to get them help immediately.
Yeah. And I like that we're doing this episode. One of the things that frustrates me the most is this overarching Democratic narrative that Republicans are mean and cold and don't care. But it's more of like, we really think through the problem and try to actually solve it. And I think on our side, we've come to the conclusion that, enabling this lifestyle indefinitely is a really horrific thing to do to a human being. So I wanted to congratulate you for being one of those few people in that industrial space that, it's a Republican that's doing a great job, a really compassionate job, in my opinion. But I'm frustrated again that the other side thinks the compassionate thing to do is to keep enabling it. And, like I said, only someone who's had a family member or a close friend or a loved one die can understand that this is not really a choice. This is the product of an addict brain thinking. And it's unfortunate.
It is.
Well,
I'm sorry.
yeah, Crystal brings up an interesting point, though, that just got me thought. So, just a few days before we're taping this, Karen Bass, mayor of LA, who's up for re-election, just gave an interview with CNN. And they brought up a interview. Alex Michelson, I think, was the interviewer, brought up an earlier interview she did before she got elected in 2022, where she promised to wipe out the homeless problem in LA by 2026. It didn't happen. Now it's gone down like 17.5%, something like that.
Okay.
But what was interesting is what she blamed, right? It's that the bureaucracy there was putting hurdles up for whatever she wanted to do. And that seems to be an interesting issue. If we identify concerns, is it, in the case of Elko, again, this firm that buys this hotel and never completes the process, is it that there's fraud incumbent in this, like we're seeing in a lot of NGOs? Is it that politicians want to maintain this for lifestyle choices? Is it that the bureaucracy, for whatever reason, has not bought into this and is slow walking permits for treatment facilities? I mean, where do we see the problem in all this?
Oh,
Can I just say something really
yeah,
quick?
sounds good, Crystal.
I really think that what's happening for Karen Bass, particularly in Los Angeles, is there's so many different businesses that cater to this industry that every time she tries to do something, they sue her. That's what I'm guessing. Because I mean, this is the tricky thing about a nonprofit. You're technically, if you're doing it right, you're trying to put yourself out of business. But most people don't do it right. They're trying to keep the problem going. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I share that opinion. And if you look at the billions and billions that they've deployed in California, recognize with that comes organizations that's primary objective is of self-propagation. Fortunately, they still have significant unhoused that they need to get off the streets. But it does not make sense to me to do anything from a municipality deploying taxpayer dollars that's not outcome based.
Mhm.
Have you followed any of the debates going on in some of this stuff over in Europe? Because places like Denmark and the Netherlands had been sort of at the cutting edge of this in terms of allowing addiction, supporting addiction services, and
Oh,
what
yeah.
we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, in part because it's generated an increased homeless problem. They're starting to back off some of these policies and rethink them. I mean, there's a huge raging debate over in Europe right now over this.
There is, and it's interesting that the drug addiction epidemic really started here, and Europe's a little behind us as it's coming. So they're learning some lessons that we've learned 10 years ago now. I've gone to several countries with NADAC, the National Association of Alcohol and Drug Counselors, where we would spend a week. I spent a week in Kosovo working with their Minister of Health while they're trying to implement substance use disorder treatment systems. And we joke that sometimes our rural health systems aren't effective. Boy, try going to Eastern Europe and take a look at substance use systems being implemented. We're head and shoulders above the ones that I saw.
Right. And I agree with that, although they do have certain advantages. I'm a French historian, a historian of France by training. One of the things you can't just walk into a store ever and bought Sudafed in France. You had to go through a pharmacist who had to recommend it through a licensed process. So, in some ways in that, I'm wondering if that plays a bit of a role. We don't, we just, this idea of buying 750 pills at once just shocked my European friends. But,
Yeah.
Well, even our side pulled back. I mean, Oregon legalized all hard drugs, and then I think like 2 years later, they're like, nope, never mind. That was a mistake.
The overdose numbers really spiked. So the deaths that were on their hands by that legislation, it really forced their hand.
And I don't think there was a Republican in the world that saw that and didn't see that coming. We're like, oh, whoa, why would you do that to your people? But you're basically performing a social experiment, and you're like, oh, sorry, that didn't work out.
Well, but then again, you have Seattle's mayor just issued the series of laws against Seattle law enforcement that they can't stop open drug use. They can't interfere. If somebody's injecting themselves on the street, they have no probable cause to interfere with this. So even though Oregon's failed, just north of them, we're going to have Seattle go through the same experiment. It's really sort of odd.
So,
it's also, it's helpful for us Republicans to have some blatantly failed Democrat experiments. So I still have a lot of hope for our state, for our rurals, for Las Vegas. There's still a lot of people who care on both sides, and with AI, we're able to more quickly access data to be able to measure. And to me, as long as we stay rooted in outcomes, I think I still have an optimistic viewpoint of the future ahead.
Well, that's good to hear.
So, Dave, do you have any advice for the Nevada legislature or for the court system? Where can we make improvements in the state of Nevada to help fix this problem?
Well, we unfortunately do need to fund a more acute mental health system, which has been slowly decimated over decades. When there's a person who's gravely mentally ill, there needs to be a place for them to go. Unfortunately, pulling on legislators' ears and encouraging them to carry a bill that seems unpopular probably won't be the path. We're probably going to have litigation when some of our gravely mentally impaired citizens end up getting a lawyer and saying, wait a minute, there's plenty of case law that the state was responsible for it. They didn't do it. So it's probably going to happen through litigation. I will say I watched last session. There were several homelessness bills of rights that were attempted that thank goodness Joe Lombardo vetoed. But I do expect we're going to see those again. And in some of these, as we talk Seattle, California, Oregon failed policies, some of them will be floated up. So unfortunately, my eyes a little more is on the defense side than it is on the offense side, because the offense side is really, we have to fund some of this mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on a homeless addicted person commits a crime, goes through the court system? Do you have a feeling of like, would it be better for that individual to have to sit in jail and sober up for a week or a month? Or, I mean, this whole turnaround and let him back out, where do you stand on that? Do you think it would be helpful to actually have him take a beat and sit in jail and sober up for a little bit?
I think the most compassionate thing that you could do to a person who's opioid dependent is put them in handcuffs, get them incarcerated, and then put them through a specialty court, which is integrated with treatment, which is evidence-based, effective, letting people continue to suffer, once they're opioid dependent is not the right thing to do. So some people say, oh, you're mean or cold-hearted. I believe the most compassionate thing you could do to a person who's opiate dependent is handcuff them.
And I just my last comment on this. I don't know if this has been your experience, Dave, but I know a lot of I talk to everybody in life. So I've talked to people that have been to jail, and the addicts particularly always are grateful that someone put them in jail. And I think people would be shocked to hear that, because they recognize they have no control over themselves, and it's the one chance they get to get back into a sober headspace and maybe chart a new course. But I was surprised to hear that. Most of them will be like, I'm kind of glad they put me in jail. It helped me sober up a little bit.
It's not the right long-term solution,
Sure.
but it's an effective short-term solution. And when integrated with a specialty court, it is the right thing to do. I go to these 12-step meetings, and I have for 21 years. And the group I go to is called the Doctors Group. And there's a bunch of doctors, a couple lawyers in there. And half of us came in handcuffs. And we all openly admit, the way I drink, the way I use, I need some outside force to help me stop. So to me, I don't look at it as a non-compassionate thing. I think it's the kindest thing we could do for our citizens who have become dependent.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, thank you for taking the time. I think this has been useful, and this is a topic I think that there actually might be a bit more similarity between the rural and urban experiences than we might have imagined in the past. But if somebody's interested in learning more or helping support your operation, where can they reach out to you and have a conversation?
Two totally separate veins. VegasStronger.org is our clinic. Please reach out, or DaveForVegas.com. I'm running for city council. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think this has been useful. And for you out there, regular viewers, or maybe you're joining us for the first time, if you have any questions for Crystal and I, feel free to reach out at info@775alive.com and, start the conversation with us. But until then, thank you again, Dave Marlon, and I'm Scott Gavorski.
And I'm Crystal Newton.
And we'll see you around the 775.